Calling the roll, Mr. Gallagher.
Here.
Ms. Baker.
Here.
Mr. Tuma.
Here.
Mr. Harrison. Here. Ms. Conwell.
Here.
There is a quorum.
Thank you. And welcome to Mr. Miller. Public comment?
No, Mr. Chair, no one has signed in.
Okay, good. In your packet, we have the minutes of February 21st. If they're in order, I'll accept a motion.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Against? Thank you very much. We have one item, 2017-0080, please.
Resolution number 2017-0080, making an award on requisition number 39164 to T.H. Martin in the amount not to exceed $895,000 for fire and smoke dampers for the period 5/1/2017 through 4/30/2020.
Thank you. And if you would, anyone that comes up to the podium, if you would give your name, and that is for not just the record, but we have new members of council. I want people to get familiar. Many of you we see often when we do have meetings, and if you would at the end introduce yourself to Ms. Baker's new, Mr. Tuma's new. Sir?
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair. Matt Reimer for the Department of Public Works. This resolution requests consideration for a new contract for the inspection, repair, and replacement services of the county's approximately 2,900 fire, smoke, and smoke-fire combination dampers throughout county facilities. This contract will ensure ongoing code compliance with NFPA and OSHA requirements for time-based visual and physical inspections of the county's fire dampers inventory. This went out as a request for proposal on February 3rd of this year. The solicitation closed on March 4th, and 3 proposals were received. A county selection committee met and selected the lowest and best of the 3 proposals. And we're asking your consideration for that resolution and the resulting award, and I'm available for any questions you may have.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Yes, ma'am.
Through the chair to Mr. Reimer, what is the breakdown of the cost per year?
To the chair, to Councilwoman Conwell, yes. So the first year, which would be this current performance year of 2017 with what remains, would be $180,000. Year 2, $350,000.
What'd you say? I'm sorry.
$350,000. Year 3, $365,000. And if I may, the explanation of that, primarily the first year is comprised of just visual inspection requirements. The latter 2 years include both visual and physical, as well as some estimated replacement services over that period of time.
So that's the increase between the 365.
Yes, Councilwoman.
And how many buildings does this cover?
I could add up the buildings. It's about 2,900 dampers, primarily congregated in the Justice Center. But quick math here.
Thank you.
13 buildings, Councilwoman. Again, 2/3 of those dampers are at the Justice Center, Jail 1, Jail 2, Justice Center Atrium Complex.
So what I'm trying to get at, this contract only covers 13 buildings plus the Justice Center. Is that an all total of the buildings that we own?
That we own that have fire damper systems that fall under this
fire,
requirement,
okay.
yes. Mm-hmm.
And the last contract in regards to this, how many years was it? Because this one is 3.
This is a new contract. So our previous efforts have all been undertaken under the capital program through the county trades being the ones that we hired temporary labor force through county trades that brought us up to snuff, so to speak. We had failing damper systems. We repaired and replaced a number of them through the capital program. This would be the first contract of its kind to carry us through into the sustainment of that effort.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Yes, sir. Cheers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. 2 of my questions have been covered, just about what did we do previously before this contract, and the length of the previous, but as I understand, we did it in-house and we hired temporary workers through the trades. Have we where are we in the completion of the repair and the fire dampers throughout the buildings?
Mr. Chair, to the councilman, we're on the verge of completion. Our last report, which was posted onto the county's website on December 16th, had approximately 80 dampers in the old courthouse that still needed to be addressed. Those were addressed in the time since our last report that was posted. We have identified 3 dampers through a separate project in Jail 2 that need attention, and those would be the last remaining 3 dampers from the first capital initiative.
Well, that's great. I remember when we started this, and to be where we are now is exciting. And I know the folks in those buildings appreciate it also to know they have a working fire damper system in case anything should happen. And the resolution also reads, repair and replaced at all Cuyahoga County-owned buildings to ensure the county is in compliance with the most up-to-date National Fire Protection Association regulations. So you briefly touched on Ms. Conwell's point. So we will actually replace some of the dampers that need to be replaced during the 3-year period that the contract extends for.
Mr. Chair, to the councilman, yes. So there, part of the pricing that I responded to for each year includes a contingency amount, a cash allowance that would be used for replacements or repairs if needed above and beyond the inspection requirements. So that would be through the coordination between the contractor and the county as to price out that action and then take that replacement action underneath the terms of the contract.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Mr. Miller.
Just a comment for our two new members. I just want to make them aware that that prior to the start of the new government, that the fire damper systems were almost totally ignored, and we had many that were not working. We had many where we didn't even know where they were. There was no regular inspection system, and that our chairman, Mr. Gallagher, personally led an effort to call attention to this problem and fought a fight over a couple of years to get this dealt with in a systematic way, and succeeded. So we're in much better shape because of his efforts.
Thank you. Thank you. Actually, it's and T. Morales and Mr. Dever here, who unfortunately had to deal with me almost on a weekly basis. I think we were all young men when this first started, young ladies. And government works slowly, and boy, this proves that. But we did. It was funny. We found dampers that were there that shouldn't have been there, and those that should have been there weren't there. Some didn't work. And in the end, I think things are safer, and with the cost, there's a cost with safety, and we've certainly found that. But the efforts and Mr. Dever's patience is certainly appreciated, and Mr. Morales, who was also there on the back end of my phone calls regarding this situation. But I'm glad we're where we're at. I'm glad that we're moving ahead in the way in which we're moving. It's taken a number of years, but I think as we moved, we did the right thing. So I really appreciate that. I would recommend. Is there a need to move this quickly, or is there a time?
Mr. Chair, there is no specific time demand, although
May 1st,
the
it
desire
was yesterday.
That was arbitrary in nature. The May 1st performance start date, that was an estimated start date. We can start whenever council considers the issue. That said, we'd like to get started as soon as possible. So if possible, a second reading request might under suspension.
If I don't hear any objection from the committee, then I'll accept a motion for Resolution 2017-0080 for second reading under suspension.
So moved.
All in favor?
Aye.
Against? Thank you very much. Thanks, Mr. Dever.
Appreciate your consideration.
Under items of discussion, I wanted to catch up. We haven't had a meeting in quite some time, and reason being we haven't had any legislation. I didn't want to drag you in if we didn't have legislation. But we were going to have this before we got the legislation, so I'm glad that we, and then we have some changeover in the Public Defender's Office. I want to catch us up there, and certainly we have to deal with our jails and our opioid. I want a little upkeep on that. You're going to start with the good doctor on the opiate task force.
Good afternoon. My name is Dr. Tom Gilson. I'm the medical examiner for Cuyahoga County and the director of the crime laboratory. Does everybody have a copy of this? Because I'm going to use this
Yes.
template. The update I'm going to give today actually is with regard to. Okay, with regard to heroin, fentanyl, and cocaine. And the reason I mention this is because we've started to track cocaine, which is not an opiate, but I will hope that becomes clear very shortly why that's become a much more important thing for us to track. If you go to the second page, which is a graph that we've continued to update over the last several years, the top part of this graph tracks out the number of drug-related deaths in Cuyahoga County on an annual basis with a projection quoted for 2017, and we are just in the process of finishing 2016, but those numbers, 636, should be fairly close, and 798 is a projection. I don't think anybody could look at this and not notice there's an alarming upward trend over the last decade, but especially in the last 2 years. If you look down towards the bottom of the graph at a red line running across, that's the drug fentanyl. And that's really been a game changer recently for the last 2 years for us. And that's been the drug that's really driven a lot of the trend that we've seen in the last 2 years. That dark blue line represents heroin, which was originally our problem. When I first came to the county in 2011, we had noticed a substantial upswing there. If you look out at that blue line, though, 2013, 2014, and 15, heroin, in fact, had plateaued a great deal over that time and was starting to trend downward. I attribute a lot of that success to the naloxone distribution program, which our county has been good to fund in addition to Metro Health Medical Center. If you look at 2016, though, what you'll see first is that fentanyl took off dramatically from 92 deaths the preceding year up to 405. The other thing that's very noticeable is heroin goes from 184 up to 308, and cocaine, which had been relatively stable for years before this, went up double from 115 to our best projection right now is 254. If we factor out the contribution of fentanyl, those two drugs did not increase significantly in 2016. So fentanyl is driving a lot of the problem here. And the cocaine problem in particular is going to have a very eye-opening demographic in that traditionally cocaine abuse was something we had seen more in the African American community. And with this rise in in cocaine and fentanyl together, we have started to see a bigger rise in African Americans in the opioid crisis. Traditionally, if we went back about 3 to 4 years, our typical demographic was a white male. Somewhere between the ages 45 to 60 was our most common, and then we started to see 30 to 45, and then 20 to 30 as our next group, or teens to 30. What we've noticed is that we're starting to see, as I mentioned, a higher percentage of African Americans dying, and we're also starting to see a younger age group with fentanyl, so that our most common age group now is that 30 to 45-year-old age range. That's a busy graph. Those were actually the big points I wanted to extract from it. If we move on to our next page, which is just a summary of where we were in April. So far, we have about 42 deaths that were attributed by screening to heroin and fentanyl. And I would say that the issue with screening has become twofold. The screens often require additional testing, and one of the other things that's kind of come into play for us is you probably heard last summer and fall about drugs that were starting to come into the market, the illegal market, like carfentanil, which is the elephant tranquilizer drug, if you heard that term. That's actually what its purpose is. If the elephant's kind of crazy at the zoo, that's what the veterinarians will reach for. That started to come into our illegal drug market. It initially showed up in Akron in the summer and within a couple months, we're in sort of a very similar distribution area. It was in our area as well, and we have had about 48 deaths related to carfentanil since 2016, so that's just the second half of last year. For this year so far, we've seen a little tip towards the city of Cleveland residents in terms of our mortality. Long term, we see pretty much an even divide between city and suburbs. I think one of the concerns I have that bears monitoring going forward is with this influx of fentanyl into the cocaine market and the African American community, are we going to start to see a higher percentage of city residents? That's still too early to tell. I don't know. But traditionally, looking out long term, the numbers have been about even between City of Cleveland and the rest of the county. And when we factor in residents from adjacent counties who've come to Cuyahoga County and overdosed here, it definitely tilts about 60-40% towards the suburbs. Victims cover all age ranges. Still more traditionally, men by about a 3-to-1 ratio. I hate to sort of be the continual bearer of bad news, but from the last time we met, the problem has substantially worsened. I think looking at that first graph that I showed you, it's impossible for me not to say that things are not headed in a good direction. From 10 years ago, we've had essentially a tripling of the number of drug-related deaths in this county, and in the last 2 years, a doubling. I mean, that's a really shocking number for any kind of crisis. And looking nationally, we're not alone, though I think we certainly have taken a harder hit on this. And the number 3 cause of death in the United States is unintentional injury after heart disease, all types of cancer, unintentional injury, and at least by my estimate of what I saw for numbers, half of those are drug overdose deaths. So I don't think we can underestimate how big a problem we're dealing with. I mean, that's ahead of a lot of other things like diabetes and liver disease, kidney disease, chronic diseases like that. That's where unintentional injuries are, and that's being driven by drug overdoses substantially. Drug overdoses overtook motor vehicle crashes in 2008 as the most common type of accidental death in the United States. So we have 10 years of experience now. If we flip over here to the next graph, this is just a breakdown actually of deaths by month in our county. The blue is heroin, red is fentanyl, the green is a combined, and then some of these are just things that are waiting confirmation. I'll leave that off for consideration for now. I think what you would notice from this is that heroin is becoming less of a player and fentanyl is becoming more of a player in our drug traffic population. And the reason this is a really alarming development is because fentanyl is on an order of about 50 times more potent than heroin. So this is a disaster because that mortality that we're seeing pushed up is really, I think, a reflection of the really unforgiving nature of a drug like fentanyl. Heroin is no picnic, but fentanyl is far worse as a drug in terms of it diminishes the effectiveness of naloxone, both in terms of shortening the window of time you can use it to reverse somebody, and it also requires often a more substantial use of naloxone. So whereas initially Project Dawn would give 2 vials of naloxone for administration, that was up to 3 last year. And especially with fentanyl and other analogs of fentanyl, which are even worse than fentanyl, as hard as that is to believe, it's diminishing the efficacy of naloxone. I would not encourage anybody to walk away from that thinking we should not fund the naloxone program, and I'll show you good data as to why I think it's a tremendous success. But I would have to say that, fentanyl changed the game dramatically in a lot of different ways, and I think that that's a big explanation why we seem to be not making a lot of headway in the problem. In fact, it's headed in the wrong direction. If we just flip over here to the next slide, sorry, it's just gradations of black and white, but I think you can see that what I was just saying is the case, that we're seeing less heroin and more fentanyl. And when we see heroin, it's almost always in combination with fentanyl in our fatal drug overdoses. If I can take you to the next slide, which is the Cuyahoga County heroin-related overdose deaths, 2007 to 2017. Up until 2013, we just tracked heroin deaths because fentanyl wasn't a big player. In 2013, we started to pay more attention to fentanyl, and that was also the year that we introduced Project Dawn, which is the deaths avoided with naloxone. The initial distribution of the antidote was just to the addicts because that was the law was changed. Subsequent to that, we started to make the drug a lot more available, and now it's available either still through the Project Dawn to addicts, friends, family members. It's also available through CVS Pharmacy, Walgreens, all the other pharmacies will sell the product as well. And we also have had a major support from first responder partners to carry this as well. That's included here. What is not included in these numbers here is reversals that were done by EMS. They're tracked separately as best I can tell. But the straight lines that you see, if you compare them to the line adjacent to it with the kind of curve going down, that's the number. The difference between those are the number of lives that have been saved by the naloxone program. And I think the most glaring one that I can see is when I look at 2016, with heroin and fentanyl, 517 deaths. Without Project Dawn, we would have had an additional 500 plus deaths as well. It's a very successful, meaningful program that deserves our fullest support. The next page that I have here just shows in a different way the impact that fentanyl has had on our county. And I think the box on the side pretty much says everything I could say, which is we've seen 160 more fentanyl-related deaths in the last 12 months than we saw in the previous decade. It's a game-changing drug. Most of the fentanyl in our country is thought to come from China. It may be routed through drug distribution routes in Mexico, but fentanyl is a laboratory product, and it's been purchased directly over the internet at some of the death scenes we've seen from suppliers in China. And I think the next page kind of repeats other things, so I don't want to take up a lot of your time. I do want to draw attention to the last page of the packet that we put out, which is the impact that we've had in the African American community with this drug epidemic. And in 2014, we had 6 individuals pass away from fentanyl-related deaths in the African American community. That number quadrupled in 2015, but it was still being overwhelmed by the large number of white residents in our county. In 2016, that number became much more noticeable, and I think if you saw that trend that we were seeing where cocaine's going up, fentanyl's going up at the same time, a lot of those overdose deaths were taking place in the African American community. And as much as it's not as dramatic a percentage increase, it's a doubling of a pretty substantially high number. And if we look at what we're projecting for 2017, it's another doubling. I mean, these are disasters. Like, I can't characterize it in any other way. And I think that that's important because people should not walk away from this thinking that it's other people who are victims of it. Initially, when we first brought things to your attention, we were saying the victims of this epidemic are not isolated inner city African Americans, you know, with drug addiction. Now it's almost like, well, they've caught up, unfortunately, you know. The longer we stay in the throes of this, everybody's life matters. The longer we stay in the throes of this, it seems like it's just a business model that is just pulling more and more people into it. I certainly wanted to thank council because I know that last week there was an appropriation in front of you to support our office, and I apologize. I had a family commitment. My wife was sick and I couldn't be here, though I gathered that Hugh Shannon told you all the bad news that I shared with you today. that's much appreciated. I have a very, very hardworking staff, and I appreciate all their efforts, but there's only so much I can squeeze out of any individual group of people, and we need help. And I think, Ms. Baker, Mr. Tuma, you have not seen my office, I know, so my cordial invitation to you and to really anybody on council who's not had an opportunity, come out and see our office. I think you'll be impressed with what you see there, and I'm very proud to be at the helm of the office. I think other visitors will tell you it was a good experience, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that I overlooked or any information I overlooked.
Questions for Dr. Gilson? Yes, ma'am.
Chair to the doctor, how is fentanyl ingested?
Much the same as heroin. It can be injected, it can be smoked, it can also be snorted. One of the more interesting things that I was at a recent conference, heroin on the eastern part of the country was predominantly a brown or white powder. As you went further west and closer to the part of Mexico that really ramped up production, we had a type of heroin called black tar heroin. It looked like tar. It was sticky and black. One of the reasons we think Ohio and other parts of the east half of the country may be more affected is because when people out on the western part of the country saw fentanyl, which is a white powder usually, show up, they were like, I don't want to mess with that. Whereas that could be very much seen interchangeably in Ohio, New England, Middle Atlantic states, where the epidemic is really at its worst, because it was like, well, it's just a super heroin. And the addicts, from what I can glean anecdotally in some, law enforcement bulletins, were more likely to try fentanyl in our area than they were west of the Mississippi.
So is fentanyl considered an illegal drug at this point if it's just by itself?
No, it isn't actually. Fentanyl was developed, it actually built Janssen Pharmaceuticals. It was developed by Peter Janssen. And it still has a very legitimate medical purpose. It's an excellent painkiller. It was initially used for treatment of severe pain in hospital. It was also used as an anesthetic in cardiac surgery because a lot of the breathing in and out anesthetics are irritating to the heart. Fentanyl was not, so it was used as an anesthetic for heart surgery. In the 1990s, it was introduced as a patch for pain, and that was part of that whole influx of prescription medications that we saw in the 1990s that really have set us up for this continuing opioid epidemic. So it started to get diverted there. Make no mistake about it, the fentanyl that we've seen since 2014 in our county is illegally manufactured, and it wasn't ever, diverted from a legitimate purpose. It was brought into this country illegally and distributed illegally. But it does have a legitimate use.
Last questions. The deaths that occur due to drug overdose, how many are indigent, and what is the cost to lay them to rest, and who is paying for that cost?
I haven't noticed particularly that they're overrepresenting our indigent population with drug overdose deaths. We have had indigent deaths stay about the same, somewhere between 80 and 100 for all of the years I've been in Cuyahoga County. The cost for burial is actually referred back to the township where the individual resided with their last known address. And depending on how they approach things, frequently they'll contract with the city of Cleveland for burial here. It's on the order of hundreds of dollars, but I couldn't give you an exact dollar figure. Cremation as another option is less expensive than actual burial as well.
So we're not tracking that. I know we've had some burial plots donated to the county, or
we have, yeah, and we've been able to use this somewhat infrequently, but certainly a nice option for us to offer. The county doesn't, as I say, bear the responsibility for burial unless, unidentified individual who might need burial. So most of the townships and municipalities within the county have some existing plan for burial. So the plots are a nice resource as a backup, but we haven't needed them as much as we thought we might have.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for being here today.
Thanks.
You know, I'm glad you called it a crisis, because obviously when you see staggering statistics like this in such a short period of time, something is amiss. Would you be able to tell us what the average age is of the overdose victims that you've seen here on average?
We tracked it, Mr. Tuma, by 15-year increments. So essentially it was actually 18 to 30. That's our youngest is 18. Then 30 to 40, 31 to 45, and 46 to 60.
Okay, so it would be incorrect to say that it's just young kids who are getting addicted to this, because a lot of times when I go out and I talk to people about this issue, little that I know about it, the response oftentimes is, "Oh, that's the young kids who are getting involved in this stuff, and you know, it's just kids being kids." And from what I'm hearing, I don't know that that's actually true. So,
in fact, it is not true.
Yeah.
And I encounter the same question because I
Yeah.
think, you know, it's a very emotional appeal. We're losing our
Right.
kids. Actually,
Right.
you know, a lot of the people who we have seen overdose, as I mentioned initially, the first wave is particularly with heroin, were 45 to 60. And a very, very frequent scenario we would see is that they would get injured on the job, get pain medication, get addicted to pain medication, have the pain medication turned off after a while because the prescriber realized they were addicted, and then they resorted to street drugs.
I see. Yeah.
And that trend held up until about 2015. With the rush of fentanyl, we saw the most common age group go down to 30 to 45. It wasn't down in the kids in their 20s or teens. I think our education efforts are not wasted in that direction.
Right.
You know, but some of the things that we see over and over again, and we've tried to drill into our data as much as possible. Where can we intervene? You know, the trades are overrepresented in terms of people who overdose because that's where people are more likely to get hurt on the job doing physical labor. 70% of our overdose victims have a high school diploma or less as education. So our community efforts, if we're going to be, you know, talking in schools like we do, really should be, you know, I almost think high school might be a little too late. You know, they probably made their minds up by then.
Yeah.
I don't think it's something we can start too early on a preventive
Right.
measure.
You know, I know you've mentioned a couple times, you know, coming through or China, Mexico. So this obviously is something that, you know, it's not just the county that needs that. This is, you know, a national epidemic. There's probably state issues that are involved as far as something. So what in your opinion do you think, you know, is the best way to try to coordinate between the various levels of government? I mean, one of the things I'm obviously new here. One of the things I'm seeing is that a lot of levels of government are trying to take steps, trying to do things, but I see a lot of programs with not so much coordination sometimes. So how do we as public officials try to get our hands around this entire epidemic? I mean, what are your thoughts as being on the other end, seeing what comes in, what happens? Is it education? Is it starting with kids really young? Is it, you know, again, I mean, there's a policing element to this as well, and a treatment element to all of this. So I'm just, again, I'm kind of just throwing a lot at you, I understand. But
Is there a question?
it's like an attorney in court or something. But again, just in your opinion, where do we start?
I can give you a couple of thoughts, just having worked on this for a while. I think first and foremost, I would say that in our own county, we actually have a very commendable group of people at most levels. Certainly, you know, I think county executives branch, my office, the sheriff, Cleveland Police, you know, where these things happen, other police chiefs, council, have all been supportive at that level. I think on the state level, we've gotten very good support from our attorney general, but any of the law enforcement people will say it's not a problem we can arrest our way out of. I think that's partly because of the scope of the problem and probably some of the experience from trying to arrest our way out of the crack epidemic, and it really didn't work terribly well. That said, if we don't treat this as a law enforcement exclusively as a law enforcement problem, there have to be other things we do, and I think those target more towards public health and risk reduction, strategies. Naloxone, I will not infrequently get told, is just facilitating drug use. Well, people who die have no chance of getting better from drug addiction, and that's my response. If they don't, necessarily drink the water on the first pass through, they still have a chance to get better somewhere down the line. Risk reduction isn't cure. It's kicking the can down the road and hoping things get better. Mm-hmm. Those are good efforts, and I think, to hear that kind of, idea that these are folks who, it's not a good investment on. We treat a lot of chronic relapsing diseases more compassionately than we treat drug addiction. We don't tell the diabetic who goes into, a sugar coma, like, well, you were here last year. I treated this, and we're not giving you insulin. Right. If we have treatment, we should use it. I think that's part of it. And the other thing that I can't stress enough is, as a community, we have to do a good job educating people, because if we don't turn the supply off, somebody will always have a demand. And, cocaine, heroin, they're plants. You have to grow plants to make those drugs. Fentanyl, carfentanil are made in a laboratory. There's always, if there's a business opportunity, somebody will step in to do that. If we don't reduce demand, and that's education at an early level, I think we will never get ahead of the problem.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Ms. Baker.
Thank you, and it is rather sobering. It doesn't look like, according to your charts, that we have really made a lot of progress, that the 2015, 2016, going into 2017, for all the efforts that we've made, it just doesn't look like we're on the right course. I guess I would ask you, and I'm sure that you have this, do you know the percentages of those that are drug addicted because of prescription drugs, drug addicted because of perhaps just bad choices, drug addicted because maybe they were, who knows? But do you have different scenarios as to why someone ends up being addicted, and in that way we may be able to help them by understanding where their addiction started?
I can give you some answers, and some I have to kind of say aren't known. First, of the people who were addicted to heroin, and this would be in 2014, so it's a few years old, 80% of them had started out with prescription pain medication. That was a study that was published by the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration.
So if I can, if you don't mind, Chair, if I can just repeat that back, 80% of 2014 drug overdoses.
This would be everybody who was, they did a big sample of people who were abusing heroin. And I think, these would be people certainly who were potential for overdosing.
And it began with a prescription.
Prescription.
And they became addicted by that prescription.
They became addicted to the pain medication and
80%
transitioned to heroin when that drug was no longer available.
Okay, in 2014. So do you think, if I may, do you think we have made progress? It may not be showing here because it's not going to end overnight. Do you think that progress has been made with that 80% of prescription drugs that we will see in 2017, 2018 as our whatever we're doing in education or, prescription with limiting and all that's out there trying to address this problem? Do you see that these lines are going to start tapering off or going down?
A couple thoughts. It's not an overnight fix. I mean, we've created a drug-addicted population, and they're going to be around for a long time. So they either get better, they die, or they wind up, removed from society. The other thing I would say about your question is it's a moving target in some ways. What I quoted to you was heroin addicts. Mm-hmm. They probably overlap with the fentanyl addicts, but that isn't anything anybody's necessarily really looked at. One of the things that my office did to start to try to, develop strategies for prevention and contribute to the overall discussion was that we started to go back and look at the system that the state set up so that you could track prescriptions of controlled substances, and we were going to go back and look at our drug overdose deaths
Right.
to see how have these people interacted with the system.
Right.
And our experience was about 2/3 to 3/4 of our people, these are people dying of illegal drug overdoses, had prescriptions for legal controlled substances within 2 years of their death. So they're in and out of the system. Maybe they're getting started, maybe they just interchangeably use one or the other. But they're certainly not foreign to the medical care system.
Yeah.
2016, CDC, our national guidelines, came out for prescribing opioids, and I know recently there was a move from state to restrict prescribing to a week. They're all good ideas. I think the things that I worry about are because the game changes so fast, I don't know what impact they have. And when we went back and looked at our fentanyl deaths in 2016 against that prescription database, what we noticed was that of these folks, we still had a decent number of people who were in the system, but at least 1/3 to 1/4 of them were in the system too short that they would have ever been picked up as doctor shopping or,
Right.
gaming the system for prescription drugs.
Right.
What concerns me is, as the problem evolves, it almost feels to me, and I think that this is why I share your sort of, I don't want to say pessimism, but I sure wish the numbers were headed in a different direction. I almost feel like the problem changes faster than we can respond to it, particularly at a national level. And that's why I really think it's places like Cuyahoga County where we've taken the lead as, a cross-sectional group to address the problem that will ultimately have a bigger impact than waiting for national initiatives.
Right.
I mean, we knew about that problem with heroin addiction and prescription pain medication years ago, but until all that data comes in, CDC doesn't put out recommendations. It's not to knock them. They need aggregate data because what they'll recommend impacts the whole nation. What we can see locally, and that's why I think an office like ours is critical, is something we can change a lot faster because we have better access to real-time information.
If I may follow, it seems to me that if 80% of the deaths are from overdose by prescription, and we have made the attempts to rein in and made aware to our medical industry that we got a problem out there, that the prescriptions are becoming too easy and too long, and also not follow up with those that we prescribe to, that although we have a certainly citizens that are addicted now, and that's a challenge, that future patients that are going to their providers, if 80% of them were given prescription drugs that were addictive, are not anymore, or at least are very limited. Do you see some optimism there that we have a problem we're trying to address, but we also see a future that is looking better because we have reined in the prescription drugs, which seem to be an overwhelming cause of addiction?
You hit the nail on the head with what starts the problem. It's absolutely right that if we don't turn off the supply of opiate-addicted people in, our country, it's just a revolving door of people replenishing supplies of people who die. So I would say, that's the thrust of, a lot of the prescribing guidelines, and that's very, very important as a strategy to reduce the number of opiate deaths that we're going to see. I honestly believe we have not been aggressive enough with pharmaceutical companies who deliberately misled this country in terms of the safety and efficacy of pain medication for long-term chronic pain.
Right.
And we've been through this once before, 100 years ago, where we, would prescribe morphine and other things to people with migraines or menstrual cramps. And surprise, they all had we had the same problem. Yeah. And I really think that, by the time large pharmaceutical companies rolled out this new idea of how to treat chronic pain. Unfortunately, all the doctors who remembered that had died. So we had to go through a second phase of this, to learn a very hard lesson over again. But if we don't turn off that group of people who are, potentially addicted from pain medication, we've lost a big chance to impact the problem. What concerns me, and this was something that we saw in the heroin epidemic in the 70s, what about these people who get addicted to heroin who bypass the healthcare system? And that's that group I mentioned, my fentanyl overdose fatalities, who don't have a long track record with pain medication, who weren't going back to the doctor every couple weeks for more pain medication. How do we reach that group? They need a different strategy.
Right.
But, if that number grows, wouldn't say stop, the prescribing pain things, but let's rethink how do we reach out to those folks. And I think that's why I think public education is such a critical piece of it, because if we turn the demand off, and we can do that in different ways, telling people, get the prescription medications out of your medicine cabinet, get rid of them.
Right.
They're not there for any useful purpose except for, to tempt a curious mind.
Right.
Those things will have an impact, I don't doubt, but I don't think, we should kid ourselves that the problem won't get worse before it gets better. It's continuing to get worse, but those kind of strategies don't fix problems overnight. Risk reduction strategies have an impact, and we should explore them.
Yeah.
And some of those are very controversial, but ultimately getting ahead of the problem, turn off the demand.
May I just one quick. So the laws that are in place now that really were put in place in the last couple of years with the medical industry and the prescriptions of being tightened, do you believe that that's been enough? Or do you think that the medical industry is still too loose in what they prescribe and are not accountable for their patients, that they perhaps may be giving more than what they should? There have been laws in the last couple of years to rein that in. I just am asking if you think that that's enough, or is it just as...
Laws and guidelines. I mean, some of it I think is not enshrined in law, and as a physician I don't know if I would necessarily, want to see medical practice enshrined in law so much as, compel the practitioner to do the right thing. But I would have to say, to answer your question, I can give you an anecdote from yesterday where I saw a friend. He just had knee surgery in December, and he showed me his, discharge instructions, and he was given 120 oxycodone with the potential for a refill or two. And I trained before pain as a fifth vital sign came into play. And I can remember sending people home. I spent 2 years training as a general surgeon before I got into this field. If you had major abdominal surgery, you might have gone home with 15 oxycodone, no refills, and you were supposed to transition over to Motrin as soon as possible. Yeah. I don't think our pain increased. I think our way to respond to it did. And I do think, the medical community is waking up to the fact that we overprescribe pain medication. And I think, it's not becoming as readily kind of winked at from the pharmaceutical industry that this is an acceptable approach to chronic pain. I think most people have backed away from that, and legitimately so. The science on which that stood was very shaky.
Thank you.
Thank you, Doctor. I've had discussions with some of my colleagues, Mr. Bova, the executive. It seems as though the state of Ohio is going to be earmarking about $183 million for programs throughout Ohio. I hope our share is reflective of our problem, and I'm pretty sure it will be. And I think that goes to the treatment of what you speak of. Now, the shutting down portion of this, I think, falls to our legal community, and my suggestion is that we double the size of our impact unit, targeting not the users but the suppliers and the pusher. Yeah. And I think with the new law in Ohio about pain meds being dispersed, I think it's 7 days now.
Yes.
I just had a recent experience with my wife. She broke her hand, and they wouldn't give her anything because she didn't get operated on. which I asked the doctor, I said, well, that's interesting. You know, that's a good move. And he goes, it's surprising. He goes, we have a lot of people coming in demanding it. And he goes, they're so used to getting it, and now they can't. He goes, we just can't do it. So I think that goes to the shutting down of and going back to what it was years ago when you were practicing in surgery. So I think all that together is going to move us in the right direction. But again, I don't know how long that's going to take, and those that are addicted are out there are just, we're going to have to deal with them as best we can. So hopefully that money from the state, hopefully the county can move forward on the targeting of the individuals that are supplying, and hopefully we can get out of this like we did get out of the, I vaguely remember as a child of the 70s, and from what I remember of the 70s, I remember heroin being that that big monster in the corner, and
then
hearing about people on heroin, but not really seeing too much of it. But it was a problem, and it was a killer. So, and now many of us are talking. My neighbor lost his nephew, and I didn't even know it because the families are keeping it undercover. You know, they're embarrassed by the death of a family member for the way in which they died, which is really, really sad and impacts me in thinking we really have to target these suppliers more on our end. On your end, hopefully that money from the state will be helpful.
Well, glad to take it.
So hopefully I'm around one day, you'll come in and have some good news for us, but I appreciate what you've done. You have certainly, since doctors come on, and we've been here, he has changed the atmosphere of that office 100-fold. I mean, it was really not in good shape. And you've turned it into a more professional, more compassionate, in my opinion, thing that touches the people of our county that are in the greatest grief. And I greatly appreciate that. And I know my members up here do too.
I will carry that back to our staff.
Looking at the chart that has the month by month,
Yeah.
I noticed that while they're certainly all very bad, the numbers for March and April are a little better than the numbers for January and February. And I'm wondering whether you take any encouragement from that, or do you think that's just the normal monthly fluctuation?
You know, I'll take good news wherever I can, and I am somewhat encouraged by that. When I go back and look at the beginning of 2016, though, I have to say we're not really that different, but at least it's not as bad as it was a couple months ago. The other only thing I'd say is a damper, not to constantly downplay. Good news is I don't know to what extent, because we can't test as rapidly for the analogs of fentanyl, the carfentanil, 3-methylfentanyl, acetylfentanyl, etc., as we can for heroin and fentanyl. So I don't really know if this is just another shell game, and while heroin and fentanyl are staying the same or going down, I'm not seeing something else popping up in their place. I'd like to think no, but we'll take it for good news for now, with at least a eye on seeing the future developments.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Doctor.
Thanks, guys. Thanks very much.
We'll
Come out and see us, please.
We'll see you at the budget, which I'm sure you'll have some further requests.
I think so. Thank you.
Yeah, who do we have here? We had our problem with the attorneys over at the jail and their visitation. Is anyone here for that? No one representing the attorneys?
Yes, we're going to have the whole team come up in a second.
Okay.
Chairman Gallagher, this is Frank Bova. First off, I'd like to publicly thank Judge John Russo for organizing our meetings with the defense bar over the last couple months. The team has included Bob Tobick, our public defender, Russ Bensing, Jay, and others from the Defense Bar, and now joining us is Mark Stanton, our new public defender. And we were led by Ken Mills, along with Sheriff Pinckney, Chief Taylor, Lieutenant Rivera, and Sergeant Cox. We believe we have come up with an additional plan to assist in even more access for our attorneys. The plan will be shared with you by Ken Mills right now.
Thank you. Mr. Mills, welcome.
Mr. Chair, Committee, Ken Mills, I'm the Director of Regional Corrections. Yeah, as Chief Bova said, we've been working on this for a couple months with the defense attorneys, trying to find a way to accommodate their need for contact visits. Through that process with Judge Russo's office, we now have it to where every Friday from 1 to 4, we're actually going to bring the inmates over to the court floors, and they're going to have contact visits over there. We're going to use that as an overflow, so when they call in to get a contact visit with the jail on the attorney hotline, if we don't have a contact room available to accommodate their visit, it'll be scheduled for that Friday for them to be able to go to those over to the court and get it done. And I believe, and I don't know if anybody wants to speak, but everybody seems satisfied with it to start it, to see how it works out. We're looking at a date of June 2nd of starting that process.
To our new members, well, we're actually kind of blindsided by this as a problem because we didn't hear anything about it, but it ended up on the front page of the Plain Dealer, which in and of itself was interesting. So we had everybody come in, and we wanted to find out what was going on because I knew the sheriff and the administration was trying to work on this, and as it turns out, I think we've come to a resolve that everybody can live with. But I think it's important to note that as far as visitations go, with attorneys and those that are guests over at the jail, Cuyahoga County, even when there was a suggested problem, we did far more than any other county in Ohio, far more. So now, not only are we doing this, which is somewhat belt and suspenders, we would like to provide this to any of the attorneys that need this. But again, we have gone above and beyond, which really kind of piqued my interest as to why this was a problem we weren't hearing about. So we got everybody here. We heard everybody out. Mr. Mills, Mr. Bova went back with the public defender and representatives of the legal community and the Bar Association, and I think we have gotten to something that I hope will be working.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, sir.
I think it's also important to add that even before the changes that we put in place from the last presentation, even when compared to the other counties, it was told us that we before any change, we still did more than, as you said, any other folks had offered, Franklin and the other counties.
Would that be accurate?
Yes, sir.
So it was interesting that this kind of we usually hear problems, but we weren't brought into it until it ended up in the news, and that's not always a good thing.
Right.
But hopefully going forward, we've got this thing licked, and if there is a problem, I would hope that those that are having the problem would go to Mr. Bova, our administration, or a council member if you're comfortable with that. The last thing we want is bad publicity in a situation in which Cuyahoga County, which is not always the case, but where Cuyahoga County was above and beyond anyone else in the state of Ohio, yet still considered a problem. So hopefully the problem's gone. I appreciate your update on that, and I look forward to hearing a finalized situation. When do you think you'll have that final as far as if it's working?
Mr. Chair, it'll start in June, and I'm sure after a month or so we'll have some data and for the defense attorneys to give some feedback. But ultimately, I think that this problem is a temporary problem, regardless of the change, because we've got the video visitation coming in, and that's anticipated to be in August, September timeframe, which that's going to free up my capacity. Even if the attorney visits are conducted through the video, still on the social visits will be, which opens up rooms for these contact visits. Sure. So, I'm very hopeful that we can put this in place and, find some common ground and meet people's needs throughout the process. or throughout the summer while we're putting in the video visitation. But I truly believe it's a short-term issue.
Well, we just, I think this was really, if anything, a communication problem, and just parties not talking, so I'm glad we're where we're at. So we can move forward. Thank you.
I have one question for
Yes, ma'am. I'm sorry.
To the chair, to Director Mills, the video visitations, is it mandatory? I know we're instituting it as kind of a helpful tool, but
It's not mandatory. It won't be mandatory for them to use that, but it'll be much more convenient for them to use it.
now, did you state that was just more for the family visits or for the attorney visits as well?
Through the chair, it'll be for both sides of it. Hopefully, the attorneys will utilize it for their routine visits or something that's not important, where they need that contact with them, which will reduce the flow coming through the jail also in the facilities.
Is that considered legal that the
Yes.
attorney
Yes.
do a video? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We'll see you in a little bit. Now, one of our favorite faces, Mr. Tobick. While it seems to me you're not really official anymore, you're official here. You can't go until we release you.
I'm well aware of that. To the chair and through the chair to the council, I'm here as the former public defender emeritus as of today. And I would like to thank you for the support you've given our office in our role of defending citizens of Cuyahoga County who do not have the funds to hire an attorney for them when they're charged with a criminal offense. I'd also like to thank you for the initiatives you've helped fund, the expungement initiative, which we were here earlier at the end of last year. We've had approximately 2,500 people come in, and 800 people have successfully had their records sealed. And thanks to the funding that you provided for that, we're able to do that. I think this council committee and the council itself has been very supportive of the Public Defender's Office, and I thank you for that. I hope that will continue. And the second thing I have to say, I would like to introduce my successor, a famous lawyer in the city of Cleveland, County of Cuyahoga, and the entire state of Ohio. I'm sounding like Jay White saying that, but Mark Stanton is my successor. Come on up here. He's been fighting the good fight, defending people for about 34 years, and very aggressively and zealously defended his clients.
Mr. Tobick, before you step aside, I just want to personally thank you. I've known you for many years, and I knew J.B. White, and unfortunately you are no J.B. White. But there's only one J.B. White, and anyone that ever has heard of Mr. White, if you don't know him, look him up. He was unto himself one of the most interesting attorneys I've ever met.
Mr. Stanton may be able to refresh some memories.
Thank you, my brother. How you doing, Mike?
I stood.
How you been?
And that's JB, and probably the sharpest dressed attorney. And he came into a court of appeals argument. I'll never forget it. And with a young attorney from his office and the prosecutor sitting on the other side, and the judges are there. And that was back in the day when you had John B. Corrigan and Leo Jackson and Mr. White. They recognized Mr. White in the courtroom. Said, "Mr. White, we see you have a young man here." And he goes, "Giannis, I just want to say, I voted for y'all." And the look on the prosecutor was, "It's over." But yeah, Mr. White was wonderful. Mr. Stanton, I wanted to bring you in because we will be dealing with you, and soon enough we'll be dealing with you with the budget coming up. I initially was under the impression that there were cuts to be made in the budgets of the public defenders, and it sounds like that's turned around. Didn't get what the public defenders asked for, but pretty darn close to it. Although that still is impactful to your budget, and I just wanted to express that when that time comes, and Mr. Miller is the chairman of finance, we will do the best we can to fund those in the county that are doing the work that is necessary.
Well, the reputation of the council that has been reported to me is that you've worked extremely well in this area. I know the Public Defender's Office and Mr. Tobick have always been very well satisfied, certainly with the effort, not always with the results, but that's something that can't always be controlled. And I'm very, very hopeful we can sustain it. I'll do everything I can to fill Mr. Tobik's shoes to that extent. And in any way we can improve any other aspect of it. My first assistant, Cullen Sweeney, is also here. Cullen could be here. He's also the deputy director. It's sort of a interchangeable term. And of course, Mr. Budzar, the administrator. All of us are very, very eager to sustain the relationship that exists here between council and the Public Defender's Office. I'm highly appreciative.
Well, I think we all recognize the importance of not just with the prosecutor being the county prosecutor, the public defender of Cuyahoga County, and there should be equal support for both sides, and I think that's important in the balance of justice. So I think we've done the best we could with what has been requested, and we'll continue. I think I'm safe to say that we'll continue to do that for you and the county prosecutor and the courts in general.
I appreciate your sincerity.
But thank you for coming in and introducing yourself to everyone, and we certainly will be seeing you again.
Thank you again.
Thank you.
Chairman.
Yes.
May I say a few words? Yes. First of all, I want to welcome Mark Stanton. I consider him a friend. In my 32 years in law enforcement, I've had in my younger career had many cases against him, with him. I respect him, and I want to welcome him. And I also want to thank Bob Tobik for his years of integrity, honesty, and professionalism. So I just wanted to say that. Thank you.
Thank you. We are lucky in Cuyahoga County to have such well thought of individuals leading not only our prosecutor's office, but now our public defender's office and the court itself. We're pretty lucky in that aspect. So I look forward to moving forward with that. And Mr. Tobik, you will be missed, and thank you again for all of your work here in Cuyahoga County. Thank you. Now, if we can go to the Cleveland jail situation. I know we don't have a definitive answer for where we're at, but I was just looking for a historical perspective on how we got to where we're at and possibly where we'll be going especially for our new members. I know they've been updated a little bit, but so we get used to this, because I know it's coming down the pike. It's pretty close.
Chairman of Council, again, I'll probably, in a second, I'll be deferring to Ken Mills, our Regional County Director. Clearly, historically, this has been going on for several years. Your committee has been an integral part of the communications with Cleveland. But over the last, since the last time we were in front of you a little over a year ago, we've worked tirelessly with the merger conversations with the city and with their committees, and we are very close to a deal. I know I should say we're close to announcing our part of the deal coming soon, as soon as we work out some final things with the county executive. And with that, I'd like to turn over where we're at right now with Ken Mills, and it's sort of a watered down, and we'll be back in front of you in a couple, within a month probably, with the actual finished product.
When it's actually before us, we'll get deeper into it.
Good.
Mr. Chair, Committee, Ken Mills, Director of Regional Corrections. I put together a little PowerPoint, Mr. Chair. Would you mind if I move through the Cleveland presentation and just go ahead through the Euclid update that you also requested? Like Chief Bova mentioned, this project's been going on a very long time. I've been the Director of Regional Correction for 2 years, and it had been going on for probably 4 years prior to me taking this, just to give you some background with it. We actually came to in 2014, we came to an agreement with Cleveland. However, the committee had concerns about the county, how we were going to do it, the fiscal end of it, and that agreement fell apart. For the last 2 years, we've been working on an alternative, how to do it. And part of the guidance that came, and I was here for the meetings, for the other public safety meetings, so I was well aware of the situation when I transitioned over. My guiding lines has been, I'm trying to structure a proposal that met this committee's and the county's previous concerns that were expressed. It needs to be it's cost neutral to the county, and it included fixed cost, where we have the startup cost, all the cost that's coming to the county are fixed and paid up front. And it's based off of per diem, a daily rate per inmate. And this time I have to introduce it, but the change, the change to the whole plan, the biggest change is we plan to utilize the Bedford Heights facility, which the other plan that wasn't included into it. So hopefully, as Chief said, we'll be bringing that to you in the near future, where I'll be able to bring you the dollars and the fiscal side of it and the whole plan, the detailed plan for you. The Comprehensive Programming Center, I was also asked to update about Euclid. Euclid, we transitioned. Euclid Jail was part of the regionalization that we took over in 14 also. And last year, we transitioned that from just a jail facility to what we consider a comprehensive programming center, focused on reentry services for inmates coming through the Cuyahoga County Jail. We opened it last year in April of 16. And you'll see, this is the data I've got on here. This will give you just to give you an idea of how many people we've touched, how many individuals have been through that program. And you can see just a couple of the big things that's happened out there is we've had 102 inmates go through an intensive outpatient plan, the treatment plans. Our culinary arts programs we've had 25 graduates, or 25 people get their Safe Serve certification. And using Towards Employment's also out there, we've prepared over 148 people for job readiness. I think that's a lot for an 83-bed facility. That's had a great deal of impact. The results of it, we haven't had a mechanism to collect good data post-release long term. But for example, the culinary arts program, we try to stay in touch with them to get some feedback on where they're at, how they're progressing. And so far, we've had 80% of them either get jobs when they come out, or they're moving on to other programs for education to continue to learn, to go back to the workforce. We're very happy with it. We think it's a very successful partnership. If you haven't been out there, I would love to take you out there to see it. Because the environment is so much different. You can see the effectiveness of it, the impact it's having on the inmates. And we want to continue this. The only way I can get our daily population down is to keep them from coming back. And so this is the first step and the biggest step in taking the resources that are here and combining them so we're addressing all sides of the inmates' needs before we release them. It's had a great impact. And, we're looking for the next steps to where they actually will come through. Employers will come in and interview them there so they have a job and they actually walk out before leaving our facility. That's coming down the road pretty soon. The culinary arts program, we've had 4 classes. The 5th one is in currently. It graduates in the 2nd of June. We're having that ceremony. We've had 31 enrolled. Now here's we've only had 13. Well, 13 have graduated from the program. The program's 9 weeks. The point of that program isn't for them to graduate. We've structured it in the jail environment to where our goal is to get them through week 4, which is their food handler ServSafe certification. That will get them a job. That opens a door for jobs for anywhere in the entry-level jobs into the industry. That's the #1 requirement for people wanting to do that. So we've had, out of the 31 that's enrolled, we've had 25 take the test, 25 pass to get their ServSafe. We have 100% of the people who've taken the test have passed for their ServSafe. So that's where I see the success. If we can keep them for the entire time, that's excellent. They can get through the whole program. But our first objective is to get them through that. And we've had them all, like I said, we've had 100% of them get their 2-year certification. And out of those, that's the feedback is that's been very productive for them once they leave. I've had a couple of them tell us they've had 4 job offers because that gets them into the door, the certification. Our long-term plan, and that's why I wanted to include this with the Cleveland plan, is if we can, once regionalization comes with Cleveland, part of that plan is to take over the Bedford Heights facility and operate that jail. And what we would do with that facility is expand our comprehensive service programming center concept from Euclid out to Bedford Heights, which would over double the capacity. We go from 83 to over 200 we could have in those programs. We're going to have additional programming, additional training. We've got partners now looking to do software training or computer skills training for them for their jobs, manufacturer training, some contracting training where they can come in and get different certifications. We're really looking to bring in the credentialed training so they have something that helps them when they walk out so they can move on. Then when that happens, we will take Euclid and transition that to a female programming facility. We have female programming going on within the jail. This doesn't erase the programs that we offer, but the focused approach would be exactly the same as what we're doing with the culinary arts, with the substance abuse, education, job skills training, the soft skills for jobs, doing the resumes, how to interview. We even have some of the partners bring in suits for them when they go out to do their interview. We would be able to offer that to the female. Plus, we would have gender responsive programming that focused on the female population. So we think that both of those will have a significant impact on our recidivism rate with what's coming back. And I think these are both necessary. The environment, we can do programming in the downtown facility, but the environment to where everybody there doesn't want to come back and everybody there is interested in bettering themselves and trying to move forward just creates a completely different environment. Instead of going to a meeting room to where they'll have some programming and then go back to general population where they're around other people, everybody like at Euclid, when they go back to their cells, they're talking about what they sit around and do study groups in the evening, and they're very positive. It's a completely different vibe. And I think that both of these two facilities is really going to have an impact on our recidivism.
Thank you. Questions?
Chair to Mr. Mills. Slide number 2, when you talked about the different organizations, how was Edwin selected, and is there a possibility that we can use more restaurants as partners?
Through the chair to the council, Edwin's wasn't selected, he was available. We welcome anybody that can contribute to this population to keep people from coming back. But when you say other restaurants, Edwin's is a restaurant training. He assisted us he comes in and assists with the curriculum development. He comes in and does, his staff or someone from there will come in and help us do audits to check the progression. And he has what we've seen that program as one path for them to follow on when they leave. They can roll in Edwin's and this prepares them to get through his course. But we're open. I've recently talked to a number of different providers that we're looking at, or resources that we're looking at bringing in for the culinary program to expand it.
Yeah, I was wondering if we were marketing that out to other individuals.
Oh, absolutely.
And then my last question would be, does Edwin's receive any program funding? I know some of the other organizations, we do provide funding, maybe not for this particular program, but for other things.
To the chair, Edwin's does it completely free for us. It's a donation of his time, of their time.
Thank you.
Thank you for your work. It appears that when those are within your control and you offer the programs, it's working, and you see results, and they're getting through the programs and enhancing their tools. I guess I don't see, though, probably the most important, and that is following them after they leave. And what is the success rate of those that have been successful in your program, have found that, you know, increasing their skills or tools is the right direction to go in. But then when they leave, do you follow whether or not they were able to be successful? And I guess I look at the towards employment of the 24 that were successful in employment when they had, I can't read, it's too small, 200 maybe that came in. So I guess I want to see it continue. It looks like you're really on a great track, and your structure is good. I just wonder, what are your thoughts in making sure that what you're doing stays with them when they leave?
Through the chair, the towards employment numbers are just, and I don't really want to speak for them, but to explain it a little better, towards employment is two sections. Okay, they get while they're in our custody, they get the job skills training. They get a lot of help there. The number drop you see is the number of them that actually enroll and go to the post-release 2 weeks training that they offer at another facility. So that doesn't mean that they weren't helping. You know, these people left with interview skills, with resumes. They might even had a job already lined up when they left. So just to clarify that, you're absolutely correct about the following them, you know, at post-release, and that is a problem in the jail for the jail environment. We try with the culinary arts program just because it's such a small control group. We physically stay in touch with them, and they call back to us. Usually, it's a interesting relationship. But part of our next steps to this is to develop those mechanisms. And that's the case management after they leave. You know, with us, once they leave us, we don't have those in place unless they're just out of the goodness of their hearts to contact us or let us know. But we're trying. That is our next focus, is to try to nail that down.
Okay, just curious. How are you going to implement that if it is a case where when they leave, and you only hope that they can perhaps get back to you to let you know how they're doing? What kind of mechanism are you thinking about doing that would correct that?
Through the chair, the answer to that is case management post-release, in making those linkages with the case manager. And that's what we're working on with our social service initiative within the jail. We've just started on the front end when people are coming in jail. We have another initiative to where when they come in the door now, they're being assessed for their social service needs. At that time, even if they're not sentenced there, our social workers are working to make those linkages to try to establish that case management post-release.
Anyone else? I think this is just another good example of the new county government. You know, to be able to implement something like this, it's not mandatory, and these are folks that are going to be sitting in jail anyhow, that have a want and need to be ready when they're released, and we're providing them with marketable skills. I think it's just fantastic to be able to do that and to expand it. And as far as follow-up, this is a pretty new program. So as we move along, I think those checks and balances will be in there. And quite honestly, the cost to us is almost nothing. I mean, we have the staff on hand, and with folks like Edwin's, and hopefully that'll expand. We have folks that won't be wanting to come back to jail anymore. And you know, a little bit more heart here in the county, I think.
Yes, sir.
And you guys are doing a great job. And I would suggest, if you haven't been out, set it up with Mr. Mills. It's an interesting experience. It's really not the jail experience that you would have downtown. Thank you very much. And look forward to the big announcement with the Cleveland jail. I think that will be transformative for not just us, but the city of Cleveland and the various jails throughout Cuyahoga County, because it's going to change the mindset on jails and the use of jails and what we're going to be doing with the jails and where the folks are going to be going within our jail system. So hopefully all that combined will be yet another positive. So thank you all for being here. Is there any miscellaneous business? Mr. Harrison?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, just want to say thank you to Mr. Tobick and Mr. Stanton for coming today, but also just want to recognize Cullen Sweeney, and Mr. Stanton touched briefly on it. Cullen is a Cleveland Heights resident and has been doing some amazing work with the Public Defender's Office for many years now, and I'm excited to see when I walked in and he was here to know that he is still on the team, and he is definitely part of the top level management at the Public Defender's Office, and I know we're in great hands with Mr. Stanton and Cullen Sweeney at the helm. So thank you for all that you have done, and Mr. Tobick, over the years with the office, and I'm happy to see the direction that we're going in. Thank you.
Anyone else? And I remember when Mr. Sweeney was yet a mere pup, a beginner, breaking ground at the Court of Appeals as a freshman, and to see him now, it makes me feel much older.
I think I was crawling around at the TV at that point.
But good seeing you, Sullivan, and thank you all for being here. We greatly appreciate it, and see you next time.